Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. I'm beside Covent Garden in London, and behind me is what was formerly Thomas Davis's bookshop. The building was put up in 1759. So Davis had been an actor and then went into the book trade. And he was a very welcoming sort of person, and he would allow a lot of literati to hang around his shop, making conversation, even though they weren't buying very much. Many of them were more or less penniless. But someone who spent a lot of time there was Dr. Samuel Johnson. So Johnson came from Lichfield, and his father had been a bookseller as well. So Samuel Johnson had gone on to Oxford University. And of course, very few people went on to higher education in those days. So he was outstanding at Latin and ancient Greek, and that was really more or less all you learnt there. You could learn other things there through Latin and ancient Greek, whether it was maths or any of the sciences or philosophy or history. Occasionally they could learn modern languages, even things like Arabic and Persian. But anyway, he left university after a 12-month, feeling it was rather unproductive. He worked as a teacher for a time, and there was no need for any teaching qualifications or a degree. Very, very few people had degrees back then. A lot of people in this country were still illiterate in the 18th century. So he came down to London, and he worked as a hack, writing whatever needed to be written, even if he found that distasteful, just to make ends meet. And he was an extraordinarily eccentric person, Samuel Johnson. When you see him, you knew he either had to be a moron or a genius. He couldn't be anything in between because of his very odd mannerisms, his speech patterns. It was a very stilted type of speech. You think, is this an affectation? But no, apparently he was not contriving this. He always spoke this way in his movements. He was very clumsy. He didn't seem to have the full vocal range when it came to other people, and limited facial expressions and so on, and would talk non-stop for hours on the most abstruse subjects. And he's best known for many of his, bon mots, saying, when you're tired of London, you're tired of life, things like that. He was sceptical of proverbs, because he's saying for one proverb you can always find one which contradicts it, like saying, great minds think alike, but then fools seldom differ. So you shouldn't set too much store about these things. Very much a Tory, loathed the idea of American independence, published Taxation No Tyranny, which was his riposte to the American Declaration of Independence, where the Continental Congress listed its grievances. So one evening here, the 17th of May, 1763, about 7 o'clock in the evening, he was chatting with Thomas Davis when who walked in. It was James Boswell was here when Dr. Johnson came in. So James Boswell was from Edinburgh, and I filmed right outside his house on the Royal Mile, just outside the gate of Edinburgh Castle, who came from quite a well-off family, was an advocate in Scotland, that's to say a lawyer, and came down to London. Now, Boswell didn't have a very Scots accent, and he thought he shouldn't mention that he was Scottish, because Samuel Johnson was very well known, even though they never met. Boswell had already heard of Samuel Johnson's reputation, because London was much smaller in those days, had only 500,000 people, and literary London was only a couple of thousand people. Johnson was known to loathe the Scots. He said to that celebrated judge, Lord Mansfield, much can be made of a Scotsman if caught young, or the noblest prospect a Scotsman ever sees is the high road to England. And he sometimes used the pejorative adjective Scotch rather than Scots of these people. Scotch is only for whiskey, or indeed a type of egg. But anyway, despite that, James Boswell was so fascinating, so delightful, that the two hit it off. And they had a great affinity for each other, and they formed a lifelong friendship, such that he became more or less the amanuensis for Samuel Johnson, writing down many of his conversational zingers. He was capable of making the most caustic comments about all sorts of people, and they could often be mordantly funny. So trying to record his table talk, as there were obviously plenty of things that were recorded anyway, because Johnson was a prolific writer, did little else in fact, didn't have much time for a personal life, and didn't seek out the company of women. He was a high Anglican, very much a member of the Church of England, believed in discriminating against religious minorities. And Boswell largely shared his opinions. So Samuel Johnson, he predeceased James Boswell. Boswell was married, had children, was not quite as odd as the other chap. Samuel Johnson seemed to be a bit of an autistic savant. Now, he's known as Dr. Johnson because he was awarded a doctorate of letters by Oxford University. There were no substantive doctorates in the Anglosphere in those days. There was also like Doctor of Divinity, but again, that was an honorary one for clergy. So PhDs as such didn't exist in this country till right at the end of the 19th century, and they were extraordinarily rare back then. So that is where one of the most famous literary partnerships in British history started off. Okay, they didn't actually write things together, but James Boswell's Life of Johnson, it gives us a fascinating insight into 18th century London, as well as into an absolutely intriguing and highly unusual character. He was an oddball. He certainly wasn't to everybody's taste, Samuel Johnson, and he seemed to be sort of incapable of informality. All right, that's enough. I'll switch it off now.